Processes of the psyche's operation. The process by which the psyche dominates and encompasses external causes, particularly physical causality, can already be observed in the most elementary period of learning. For example, when a child begins to learn to walk, a relationship is established between its weight, muscular strength, and gravity, which can easily be reduced to a classical mechanical equation. By learning to walk, the child is subjected to an external physical necessity. As it learns, that is, as it internalizes the relationship between its weight, gravity, and muscular strength, it begins to anticipate falls and thus avoid them. Therefore, although the physical law that governs falling is still present, it has ceased to operate physically and has begun to operate psychically. The psyche, then, anticipates physical determination and, in a certain way, begins to circumvent it in the interest of the individual. Every process of learning any physical activity always occurs through the anticipation of a need, of a resistance from the world. This resistance being circumvented through anticipation. The resistance is circumvented, but continues to be in force, as if the need, which limits the organism's action, was subsequently used by that same organism in the interest of itself. The same thing happens with logical necessity. Certain things that are logically impossible for us offer resistance. As we learn the formulas of these logical necessities, we internalize them and begin to circumvent them, in the sense that if we cannot do a certain thing one way, we do it another. And finally, we try to outsmart chance itself, in the sense that the individual whose psyche is functioning at an optimal level can even be lucky, as if they had outsmarted chance. Luck and bad luck are the two names of chance, so we outsmart chance in the interest of the psyche. Will to power. Regarding the will to power, for lack of a better term, we follow Nietzsche. That is, the more territories the psyche dominates, the more it wants to dominate. The psyche is expansive by its very nature. The expansive characteristic of the psyche is obtained through a contraction, as paradoxical as this may seem. That is, the psyche acquires power to the extent that it conforms to physical, logical necessity and chance, learning to circumvent them. It achieves this when it internalizes the set of determinations given by the laws and possibilities of those necessities that surround it, making this set a content of itself by adapting to the forms of the physical world, the logical structures of the world, as well as the determinations of chance itself. Thus, to the extent that it contracts to adapt, the psyche expands and acquires the power to act on the external and internal world, inclusive. The process of the psyche's adaptation. This adaptation of the psyche requires, in the first place, the cooperation of perception and memory. At the moment when memory comes into play, through the retention of lived experiences and the abstraction that takes place from it, the process of generalization. The set of these abstractions and generalizations goes on to constitute a kind of deposit, which is organized according to a logical framework in the individual's head, forming their image of the world. However, the individual not only organizes their experience logically, but also chronologically. That is, they tell their own story. They know what has happened to them. For example, the subject acts today with a certain objective, and if they cannot achieve it today, tomorrow they remember that they tried and failed, and they try again, or else they change knowing that they changed and why they did so. It is as if they were writing down everything that happens to them as well as the decisions they make, putting their historical development in line. This is called the ego. So, the psyche, not forgetting that it is always an individual psyche, expands to act in the world, to acquire the power to act in the world to the same extent that it retracts its possibilities. We have seen that the psyche is initially an indistinct, loose, chaotic set of possibilities, and when these undefined possibilities become limited, undergo certain determinations, is when possible realizations, possible acts emerge. These possibilities are being cut, abandoned, as it is perceived that they are incompatible with logical and physical necessities, and with chance, which is the set of present conditions which exist at a given moment and cannot be closed within a delimited framework. That is, chance is always in becoming. For example, the child who gives up flying, or who postpones a difficult thing, like, for example, sees a pool and thinks they can get in and swim out like everyone else, gets in the water, drowns, and needs to be rescued. They then realize that such an act is a bit more complicated than they had imagined and give up swimming by the force of positive thinking or retract, becoming traumatized and never wanting to swim again, or even decide humbly to learn like the other people. What the child did then was to close a door to a possibility that, under those present conditions, could not be realized on the plane of physical necessity, but only on the plane of the psyche as potentiality, in this case, future possibility. It can be seen that, as potentiality, the psyche is destined never to be realized. In relation to these logical and physical necessities, it matters little whether they reach us through direct experience or through learning. For example, the child who learned that they cannot fly, whether this learning was due to a frustrated attempt, or if they learned following their mother's wise advice, it does not matter. In both cases, it is a limitation that was imposed on them. In this case, it is easy to see that learning that was not obtained through one's own experience shortens suffering. That is, the more one is able to learn from the experience of others, the faster one learns, and the more one needs to repeat the experience, the lower the learning yield. The process of the psyche's learning. The learning process consists of an adaptation of the psyche to logical, physical, and chance necessities. This adaptation is carried out through the internalization of impossibilities. That is, the individual perceives that not all the things that limit their action are random, that there are repeated impossibilities. Some are captured from physical necessity itself. Others are abstracted and perceived as logical necessities. And finally, others that, not perceiving as being repeated, are said to be chance, regardless of whether they are or not. That is, regardless of whether philosophically chance exists or not. As the psyche adapts to these external conditions, it acquires a power of action. If it were to adapt to the totality of the conditions imposed by the necessities of the physical, logical order and chance, it would acquire a universal power. Assuming that it knew the entire universe, that it could act freely in all spheres of reality, it would have swallowed the cosmos, and in this sense would cease to be a psyche. It would be, so to speak, a consciousness, but no longer a psyche. What exactly that would be is something that a theologian could ask. We can imagine that God's psyche would be a psyche like that. That is, a psyche where there is no more potentiality. Thomas Aquinas said that God is pure act of being, that is, act without potentiality. When nothing exists as a possibility to be realized, everything that can be realized is realized. If we were to imagine a psyche where there is no more potentiality and that above all is pure act, this would be the psyche of God.